This is Pastor Brady Henderson, the senior pastor of Gaston's First Baptist Church, and you are listening to the Menorah Podcast Ministry, the podcast that seeks to share the light, speak the light, and send the light of Jesus Christ through the airwaves. And I am here today with one of my best friends and co-host of the Menorah Podcast, Alan Ott.
Hey guys, welcome to May.
I can't believe it, man. It's already May. We talked about that in our staff meeting earlier this week about how surprised we both were that April flew by that quick.
Yep.
And, usually, Al, April in the life of our church and churches is usually a little bit quieter, but our April wasn't quiet.
No, we had a lot going on this April. We finished up our D groups last week. We had our church picnic for the first time since before COVID.
Yeah, 2019. So first time in 5 years, and just appreciate all our volunteers, and really want to give a shout out to the hostess committee too.
People don't realize what goes into things such as this. I mean, there's a lot of logistics that has to happen. There's a lot that goes on, and we can't say enough good stuff about those guys because it takes dedication to keep up with stuff like that. And those guys do a great job, not just special events, but just the regular, everyday Wednesday meals.
Absolutely. All right, guys. Well, today, since today's the first Thursday of the month, if you keep up with the Menorah Podcast, you know that means it is time for our pastor profile. And we did this last month where since we are getting close to our 200th year celebration, which will be in August, last Sunday in August will be our homecoming service. And so since we're getting close to that, we're deciding to discuss on our pastor profile pastors that pastored here. And so we are super excited to be able to do that, and we're going to do that today. Last month, we talked about Reverend Till, and so we're going to talk about today the person that actually came before Reverend Till. And for those that are a little bit, we still have some folks in our church that remember who we're going to talk about today. And before I say his name, Alan, I think out of all the former pastors, he's in the top three of the names that I hear the most. Now, granted, a lot of the people that were under his ministry have already gone to be with the Lord, most of them. But the ones who were young at that time have told me many times the impact that this person made, and the person we're going to talk about today is Reverend Everette Talbert. Preacher Talbert, as he's referred to, I'll call him pastor, doesn't matter what you call him, but he started serving as pastor here at First Baptist in December of 1954. And yet again, I'm pulling notes that Sandra Pound has put together that she shared with me a while back. She has so many notes from minutes and things of that nature. So he served from late 1954 to June 10th of 1956. So he was only here 19 months. And so I think the interesting thing about Reverend Talbert, there's several things that are interesting. Reverend Talbert, when he came to our church, it was known as Sandy Run Baptist Church.
Okay.
And when he left, it was First Baptist Church of Gaston. And I think we mentioned in the last month's episode of the Pastor Profile, we talked a little bit about that vote and how that vote went, I believe, and how it was 70 yeas and 55 nays. And so, it was a really close vote as far as votes go. Another thing that's interesting about Reverend Everette Talbert is that he's really well known in the community that I come from, Greer, South Carolina, and Reverend Everette Talbert founded Riverside Baptist Church, which is a large church in Greer, and he also pastored for, I believe, 11 years, Pleasant Grove Baptist Church, which is also in Greer. And so when you look at the names of former pastors, his definitely sticks out. Reverend Everette Talbert was really well known in our convention. He served in a lot of different roles and associations. Obviously, he was a church planner. But I think the thing about Reverend Talbert that most people remember is that he was a dynamic preacher. I mean, that was his thing. The man could just flat out preach. I just think that is just so interesting about him. Several different things. He did pastor quite a few different churches. And I do want to remind our listeners, it hasn't been until, I would say, the last 40 years, that pastors have stayed a long time. What we have to remember historically is that prior to World War II, almost every Southern Baptist church, when they called a pastor, they literally had to sign him on for the next year, like a contract. And they were only by a year-by-year contract. And I just think it's interesting that, our church finally did away with that, I believe, with Reverend Monroe. before him, they said, hey, we want to keep him. And so they voted that away.
Right.
But, I mean, that was just 70 years ago. That's one reason why like, for example, my second great-grandfather pastored 14 churches. And that seems like a lot. Some of those were at the same time, but you got to remember they were on a year-by-year basis.
Yep. Well, they were coming off of their circuit
Yes.
preaching too. So.
Yeah, so it was kind of that transition time. And so that's why you see preachers today stay a lot longer, because unless there's something I don't know, I'm pretty sure it's indefinite, right?
Right.
Until the Lord calls somewhere else. So he was a dynamic preacher, and I think what's interesting is during his ministry there, we have church records that the little church, and when I say the little church, I'm talking about the previous sanctuary, was full. And there were chairs in the aisles. I've had a few older folks tell me that they believe there was over 300 people in worship, or while he was serving here. And that makes me happy, because just a few weeks ago at Easter, we had over 300 people here. Mm-hmm. And that was just amazing. It's really cool how God used Reverend Talbert here in such a short amount of time. Looking at some of the church minutes, before I do that, Alan, I want to ask you, what have you heard about Reverend Talbert? Because I'm sure your dad was a deacon while he was here.
I haven't heard that much. He left quite a while before I was born.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
But, I have heard the name. I've heard his name. I'd heard Reverend Till, Reverend Brady, Reverend Monroe. Reverend Monroe was actually an interim many years later after he had been our full-time pastor for a while. Again, that was probably a little before my time, or I was still young enough that I really didn't pay attention to all that was going on.
Yeah. One thing about Reverend Talbert that I do want to point out is several homecomings ago, I actually invited Reverend Stephen Talbert to come back and to preach.
Right.
And Stephen Talbert was Everette Talbert's son. You know, his son, I actually grew up at Fairview in Greer, and Fairview, he was on staff at a satellite campus that we've had for a very short period of time. He was the campus pastor there, and so I grew up playing basketball against his son. So that's Reverend Everette Talbert's grandson, which is Michael.
Right.
And so I know Michael. Michael and I went to Anderson University together. He's a few years older than me, but I've always known Michael. Mm-hmm. And so I reached out to Michael and I said, hey, I just put two and two together that your dad is Pastor Talbert, but your granddad was Everette Talbert. And so I talked with Stephen. Now, his brother was here, and I believe some of the older folks I've talked to have told me they remember Knox, I believe, was his name, and he was a pastor too.
I have heard him speak before, but I cannot remember that context.
I think what's interesting, too, I've never heard this name before. I don't know if some of our listeners would like to comment on this, but in September of 1955, it says from the church minutes, Mr. Atwood was elected as assistant pastor. So I've never heard that name.
I have not either.
So I'm not sure if there's anything that will else that says anything about him, but that's interesting. So the church obviously grew, and kind of like the same situation we've had, they needed to add more staff to do that. Let's see, several different things here. I think, there's a letter here that was sent out by Lever C. Sharp. Tell me about Lever.
Lever was one of the guys that, as I was growing up, he was one of our church leaders. Yeah. He was later also mayor of Gaston.
Oh, okay.
I can't remember. I want to say he was the first mayor of Gaston, and I remember him being fairly well involved within the church.
Huh. Well, that's awesome. It says here that he sent a letter inviting people to homecoming in 1955. Here's something really interesting. In 1955, I'm looking here at the people that Reverend Everette Talbert baptized. Some of these names that some of you will recognize. On January 23rd of 1955, Jimmy Pound was baptized by Reverend Everette Talbert. Jimmy has told me about that. He has gone through that with me before, and I just think that is just so cool that he still remembers that to this day. I also think it's interesting that it says Miss Sandra Pound was baptized on January the 16th by Reverend Everette Talbert. I'm assuming I'm not sure which Sandra Pound that would be, because I know there was
two.
too. So I'm not exactly sure which one. Maybe one of them can tell me which one it was. In 1955, on February the 6th, Keith Pound was baptized by Reverend Everette Talbert. And so I just think that is really, really cool. That we still have some of these records from some of those days. Here's something that you'll find interesting. On December the 1st of 1955, the pastor was paid $300 a year.
Wow.
So there you go.
How long do you think you could survive on $300 in today's economy? You can probably get to work almost a week just buying gas.
Yeah, that's it. And just doesn't that show you how much things have changed?
Yeah.
Looking here, $40.58 for candy and fruit.
I guess that was for the Brotherhood fruit baskets.
I would assume so. And then they paid $3.75 for Brotherhood journals. Here it says, deacons recommend that all mothers, 1956 now, deacons recommend that all mothers be responsible for their own babies at the church. The nursery will be heated.
Interesting wording.
Yeah, very interesting. I mean, maybe not the way we would do it now, but that's okay. By the way, all this happened under Reverend Talbert's ministry. I know members of his family, and I believe that there are remnants of his ministry still today from how impactful his preaching and his pastoring and all of that really was. On August the 1st of 1956, they had a special conference, a recommendation from the Pulpit Committee, and they recommended Reverend Leonard Berry, and the church voted on him, and 52 people said yes, and 47 people said no. That's not great if you're coming into a new church. And so, anyway, I don't think he accepted, because I don't see him anywhere on our records.
Yeah, that name's not familiar to me.
And a lot of this will be included in our history book that will be released hopefully sometime next year, that Sandra Pound has worked so diligently on. And so thankful for her and her contributions in that. And so I do see here, before we let you go, that there was a letter read to church that was received from Leonard Berry, and I'm assuming that would have been his resignation, because that came on August the 8th. So I would assume that that's what that was. Yeah. That he got word of it and decided not to come, because that's when Reverend Till came.
Okay.
So that's was right after that. So anyway, that's a little bit about the history, and a little bit about what Reverend Everette Talbert had the impact here in so many things that his ministry was a part of. So this has been our pastor profile yet again. Today is Thursday, May the 2nd. We hope you have a great day, and we will see you
next time.
on the
Bye,
Menorah
guys.
Podcast. See you guys. Bye-bye.